Welcome to the Skin Bliss podcast, where we break down skincare with science, not hype.
Picture this. It's a random Tuesday morning. You are standing in your bathroom, leaning slightly over the sink, and the lighting is just doing you absolutely no favors.
Oh, yeah. The worst lighting imaginable.
Right. And you lean in just a fraction closer to the mirror, and suddenly you spot it. And you think to yourself, wait, those lines definitely were not there last year.
It's such a universal and honestly humbling moment. I mean, we've all been trapped under those harsh fluorescent lights, making a visual discovery we weren't entirely prepared for.
Usually before we even had our morning coffee, which makes it worse.
Exactly.
And because you know a bit about skincare, your first instinct is probably to just immediately reach for the heavy artillery. You know, you pull out your phone, you open a browser, and suddenly you're hovering over the checkout button with a cart full of the highest percentage industrial strength retinoids and keeling acids you can legally buy.
The panic buy. It happens to the best of us.
But we are going to ask you to step away from the digital shopping cart today, because this deep dive is built around an incredibly detailed briefing from the Aging at 30+ series. And the mission here is fundamental. Before you put a single new drop of serum on your face, you need to diagnose the actual etiology of the lines you are seeing.
Because treating all visible lines as if they stem from the exact same biological process is, it's the primary reason people end up with compromised skin barriers and empty wallets.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The premise of our analysis today is that the solution is dictated entirely by the cause. We are dealing with very distinct physiological realities here, and throwing an aggressive cellular turnover agent at a problem that actually requires a lipid barrier repair is just a recipe for disaster.
I know this firsthand. I remember a few winters ago, I decided to layer a really high-strength chemical exfoliant with my regular prescription retinoid. Yeah, I wanted that glassy glow for a holiday party. And 2 days later, my entire forehead and my cheeks looked like crumpled tissue paper. I completely panicked, thinking my collagen had just given up overnight. But reading through the briefing for today, I realized I was just experiencing what they call the fake out.
The fake out, yes. Which is technically just dehydration lines, where it's classic barrier compromise. And what's crucial for you to understand here is that dehydration lines are entirely distinct from structural aging.
So it's not actual aging.
Not at all. People see that sudden network of superficial crinkled lines and they assume their dermal matrix is collapsing. But it's actually an issue of transepidermal water loss. TEWL.
Transepidermal water loss.
Exactly. When the stratum corneum, which is the outermost layer of your skin, is depleted of water, the corneocytes essentially just shrivel up.
So it's kind of like the microscopic version of a grape turning into a raisin.
That is the perfect analogy. And the hallmark of this is the speed of onset. Real structural collagen degradation takes years to manifest visually. Dehydration lines, though, they can appear in a matter of hours.
Hours? That's wild.
Yeah, usually triggered by aggressive actives like you used, or a sudden drop in environmental humidity, or just a damaged lipid barrier. It really doesn't matter if you are 25 or 65. If you strip the water from the upper layers, the skin is going to fold into that crinkled texture.
So if you're looking in the mirror and you notice this superficial all-over crinkling, the absolute worst thing you can do is apply a strong anti-aging active.
You are just throwing gasoline on a fire.
Because you're attacking an already weak barrier.
Exactly. You are further degrading it. The intervention here requires stepping down your routine. You drop the acids, you drop the retinoids temporarily. You need to flood the skin with humectants to bind water back into the epidermis, and then immediately seal it with a robust occlusive.
Right, because the humectants are useless if they just evaporate right back into the dry winter air.
Precise.
You need that heavy occlusive layer to trap the moisture against the skin. And honestly, the incredibly satisfying part about getting this specific diagnosis right is the timeline. The sources note that once you halt the transepidermal water loss, these lines don't just fade, they completely disappear.
Because the skin plumps back to its baseline volume. It's one of the very few instant gratifications you get in dermatology.
I love instant gratification.
Yeah.
But of course, we have to talk about the lines that do not just vanish with a good moisturizer.
Right. The physical map of your life.
Yeah, the briefing goes deep into expression lines, which form in high movement areas. So we're talking the forehead, the crow's feet from squinting or smiling, the 11s between the brows.
The classic high traffic zones.
And since anyone joining us for this deep dive already knows the basic difference between dynamic lines that appear with movement and static lines that stick around when the face is at rest, I really want to talk about the breaking point. What is actually happening in the dermal layer when a line crosses that threshold from dynamic to permanent?
It fundamentally comes down to mechanical stress and fibroblast fatigue. Every single time a muscle contracts, it folds the attached skin.
Right.
Initially, your collagen and elastin fibers have the resilience to snap right back. But over years of that repeated creasing, you are causing micro-trauma to the extracellular matrix in that specific anatomical fold.
So the skin is just getting worn out in that one spot.
Yes, and the fibroblasts, which are the cells responsible for churning out new collagen, eventually just cannot keep up with the rate of degradation.
So the scaffolding essentially snaps.
It physically collapses. The structural proteins are permanently altered, which is why the crease remains visible even when the underlying muscle is completely relaxed.
Okay, this brings up a really tough reality check from the source material. If a deep static line is the result of a physically collapsed dermal matrix, what are we even doing buying topical retinoids for expression lines? I mean, are we just wasting our money?
Not entirely, no, but you do have to align your expectations with the biology.
Yeah.
Topicals like retinoids are excellent at softening early static lines because they bind to retinoic acid receptors in the skin. This upregulates cell turnover and stimulates the fibroblasts to produce more collagen.
So it thickens the skin.
Exactly. It can thicken the dermis and visually plump the crease from the bottom up. However, the hard truth is that once a furrow is deeply etched, meaning the structural collapse is severe, a topical cream cannot rebuild that architecture.
It can't perform a miracle.
No, it can refine the skin texture over the fold, making it look less prominent, but it will not erase it.
That makes sense. You can smooth the surface of the canyon, but you can't fill the entire canyon with a serum.
I like that, yes.
And that structural breakdown is remarkably similar to what happens with sun damage lines, though the catalyst is entirely different, right?
Right.
Instead of mechanical stress from smiling or frowning, we were talking about environmental radiation.
UV radiation is the ultimate enemy of the extracellular matrix. When UV rays penetrate the skin, they generate reactive oxygen species.
Free radicals.
Exactly. Which in turn activates enzymes called matrix metalloproteinases, or MMPs.
MMPs?
Right, and these enzymes literally act like molecular scissors, chopping up your healthy collagen and elastin fibers.
Molecular scissors. That's a terrifying visual, but it gets the point across. And the briefing points out that these UV-induced lines almost never travel alone.
No, they don't.
If you're looking at your cheeks, your chest, or the back of your hands, and by the way, it is wild how many people will use a $200 face serum, but just let their hands bake on the steering wheel every single day.
It's the biggest blind spot in skincare.
It really is. But if you look at those areas, you won't just see wrinkling. You're going to see the accompanying hyperpigmentation.
Yes, the mottled appearance. The UV exposure triggers a cascade where melanocytes go into overdrive. They produce these irregular clumps of pigment right alongside the structural degradation. It is a dual-front attack on the skin's appearance.
So the strategy here has to be multi-pronged. The sources are absolutely definitive about this. You have to stop the bleeding first. Broad-spectrum SPF is your non-negotiable prevention.
Period.
And for the existing damage, you're looking at a combination of vitamin C to inhibit the melanin production and neutralize those free radicals, paired with a retinoid to address the structural thinning.
But again, we have to manage expectations. Relying on topicals for severe photo damage is an uphill battle. If the collagen degradation and the hyperpigmentation are significant, creams will only provide a marginal improvement.
So what's the next step?
That is when you have to pivot from skincare to clinical interventions. We are talking lasers to target the pigment and resurface the texture, or medium-depth chemical peels.
Right. It's all about knowing the limits of your bathroom cabinet. Which naturally brings us to the most frustrating skin shift detailed in the Aging at 30 Plus series, crepey skin.
Severe elasticity loss.
Yes. This isn't a furrow or a fold like an expression line. This is when the skin itself fundamentally changes texture. It loses its bounce and starts feeling uncomfortably thin. It literally resembles crepe paper.
It is a systemic loss of structural integrity, particularly at the dermal-epidermal junction. You typically see this in areas where the skin is anatomically the thinnest anyway, the periocular area under the eyes, the neck, and the décolletage.
And it's also the primary skin complaint following significant weight loss, which I found fascinating in the briefing.
Yes, very common.
If someone drops 30 pounds, they often notice creepy skin on their body and their face. Why does that specific trigger cause this specific texture?
Well, when you carry excess weight, the skin stretches to accommodate the underlying fat pads. The collagen and elastin network is placed under sustained tension.
It's like a rubber band.
Precisely. When that fat volume is suddenly reduced, the stretched skin attempts to retract. But if the elastic fibers have been compromised by age, genetics, or just prolonged stretching, they lack the recoil capacity.
They can't snap back.
Right. The skin deflates without snapping back, and that results in that finely wrinkled, lax appearance.
So if someone is dealing with this really fragile, deflated texture, dropping a prescription-strength retinoid on it seems like a terrible idea.
It is a terrible idea. Because creepy skin is already so thin and structurally compromised, hitting it with an aggressive cellular turnover agent is just going to induce massive inflammation and exacerbate the barrier dysfunction.
They're doing more harm than good.
Absolutely. The approach here must be deeply reparative. Consistent hydration is paramount because plumping the uppermost layers immediately softens that fragile appearance. But you also need targeted structural signaling.
Right. And the sources highlight peptides and ceramides for this. And since our listeners know the basics, let's talk about the specific mechanics of why this works. Peptides are essentially short chains of amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins like collagen.
Exactly. But they don't just sit there acting as passive structural support. Specific signaling peptides act as messengers.
Messengers to the cells.
Yes. See, when collagen breaks down naturally, it creates specific peptide fragments. By applying synthetic versions of these fragments topically, you are essentially tricking the skin's receptors.
Tricking them how?
You're making them think a massive collagen breakdown has just occurred. This triggers the fibroblasts into an emergency production phase to repair the damage.
That is brilliant. You are hacking the skin's wound healing response without actually causing a wound.
Exactly. It's highly effective.
And with ceramides, it isn't just about slapping any lipid on the skin. It's about repairing the mortar between the cells.
And the formulation is everything here. For optimal barrier repair in creepy skin, clinical data heavily favors the golden ratio of lipids.
The golden ratio. I love that term.
It's crucial. 3 parts ceramides to 1 part cholesterol to 1 part free fatty acids.
3 to 1 to 1.
Right. This specific ratio mimics the skin's natural lipid matrix. This allows for genuine integration and repair rather than just acting as a superficial grease layer sitting on top of the skin.
Which perfectly transitions us into the hard numbers. The sources provide a really sobering reality check on the science of topicals. We are constantly bombarded by marketing poetry promising a facelift in a pump bottle. I want to look at what the clinical data actually supports.
It's important to look at the data.
We know retinoids are the gold standard. What are the actual quantifiable results?
The clinical literature demonstrates that consistent use of a well-formulated retinoid can reduce the depth and appearance of fine lines by 20 to 30%.
20 to 30%. I mean, that is significant, but it's not the 100% erasure that a lot of people expect when they start using them.
No, it's not. And the critical caveat is the timeline. Achieving that 20 to 30% reduction requires continuous use for 6 to 12 months.
6 to 12 months.
Yes. Neocollagenesis, which is the creation of new, structurally sound collagen, is a remarkably slow biological process. You're completely rebuilding the dermal matrix microscopically.
That timeline is something everyone listening needs to internalize. In an era of next-day delivery, expecting your skin architecture to transform in 3 weeks is just setting yourself up for disappointment. You have to play the long game.
You really do.
And then there's vitamin C. The briefing notes it provides essential antioxidant protection, but visually, the results are categorized as modest brightening. It's not going to bleach out a 10-year-old sunspot overnight.
No, it won't. It inhibits the tyrosinase enzyme to gradually reduce melanin transfer, and it neutralizes the daily oxidative stress from pollution and incidental UV exposure.
So it's more of a defense mechanism.
Exactly. It is a supportive player, crucial for long-term health, but subtle in its immediate visual impact.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, because the briefing drops a massive statistic regarding sunscreen.
The 80% stat.
Yes. Consistent use of a broad-spectrum SPF prevents 80% of the visible signs of photoaging. 80%. So if sunscreen is doing the vast majority of the heavy lifting, preventing the MMPs from chopping up our collagen in the first place, aren't the skincare companies just selling us an incredibly expensive 20% margin of error? Should we really be obsessing over $100 peptide serums?
It's a very fair challenge. Sunscreen is unequivocally the most powerful anti-aging topical in existence. Full stop.
Right.
However, that remaining 20% is not insignificant. It dictates the overall resilience, texture, and luminosity of the canvas.
I see what you mean.
You can prevent structural collapse with SPF, but if your barrier is severely dehydrated or your cell turnover has slowed to a crawl due to biological aging, your skin will still look dull, creepy, and compromised. The actives manage the quality of the skin that the sunscreen is protecting.
That makes perfect sense. SPF is the shield, and the actives are the maintenance crew.
Great way to put it.
But this leads to an important boundary-setting moment in the deep dive. The sources emphasize what topicals fundamentally cannot do.
Yes, this is vital.
No matter the price point or the patented delivery system, a topical serum cannot replace lost facial fat pads. It cannot physically lift tissue that is descended due to gravity and bone loss.
If you are dealing with significant volume loss in the midface or severe laxity along the jawline, no topical formulation is going to reverse that.
It's just biologically impossible.
Right. But recognizing these limitations is incredibly empowering. It frees you from the cycle of constantly chasing miracles in expensive jars.
It takes the pressure off, which is exactly why the source material advocates for the anti-overwhelm routine.
Yes, my favorite part.
For the last several years, there's been this intense cultural pressure to adopt 10-step, 12-step skincare routines, layering toners over essences, over ampoules, over 3 different serums. The briefing is remarkably blunt about this. A 10-step routine is entirely unnecessary, and I would argue, based on what we've discussed today, it's often damaging.
It is highly counterproductive. When you layer that many complex formulations, you are compounding penetration enhancers, preservatives, and conflicting pH levels.
So that's a chemical soup.
Exactly. The risk of contact dermatitis or triggering those type 1 dehydration lines we talked about skyrockets. The most biologically sound approach is a stripped-down, targeted methodology.
So what does that clinically optimized minimalist AM routine actually look like?
It is 4 deliberate steps. First, a gentle cleanser to remove overnight sebum and product residue. Second, your vitamin C serum for daily antioxidant defense against environmental insults. Third, a well-formulated moisturizer to secure barrier function. And fourth, the absolute non-negotiable, an even application of SPF 30 or higher.
Cleanse, vitamin C, moisturize, protect. That takes less than 2 minutes.
Easily. And the evening routine is even leaner.
Let's hear it.
Just 3 steps in the PM. A thorough, gentle cleanse to remove the day's SPF and pollutants. Your retinoid, adhering strictly to the start low, go slow principle to avoid tipping the skin into an inflammatory state. And finally, your occlusive moisturizer to prevent transepidermal water loss overnight.
It is so refreshing to hear that treating your skin properly doesn't require a complex spreadsheet. Although, speaking of spreadsheets and tracking, the briefing mentions a tool that I think is brilliant for this specific long-term approach.
Skin Bliss.
Yes, an app called Skin Bliss. They recommend it to help users build these simplified routines and track their ingredients. But more importantly, it allows you to log your skin's progress over time.
The photographic tracking is perhaps the most valuable feature.
Why is that?
Well, when you are utilizing ingredients like retinoids or peptides that operate on a 6 to 12-month timeline, the incremental changes are imperceptible in the mirror day to day.
Right, because you see yourself every single morning.
Exactly. Our brains simply cannot track micro-improvements over a year. Having an objective visual log prevents the frustration that leads people to abandon a perfectly good routine prematurely.
It keeps you tethered to reality while the science does its slow work. We have covered an incredible amount of clinical ground today. The overarching takeaway from this briefing is that skincare should never be a game of blind roulette.
Never.
When you look in the mirror and notice a new line or a textural shift, panic is the enemy. Diagnosis is the answer. You have to ask the right questions. Are you looking at superficial corneocytes shriveling from dehydration? Are you seeing a collapsed dermal matrix from years of mechanical expression? Is it the mottled, degraded signature of UV radiation? Or is it the thin, deflated hallmark of systemic elasticity loss?
The morphology of the line tells you exactly what the skin requires. Once you correctly diagnose the mechanism of action, you can deploy the specific biochemical intervention needed. It removes the guesswork, protects your barrier from unnecessary trauma, and yields actual physiological improvements.
So your mission for today, if you choose to accept it, next time you're in your bathroom, open your cabinet and honestly audit the products sitting on your shelf. Are you deploying a heavy retinoid against a simple case of dehydration? Are you expecting a peptide serum to fix 10 years of sun damage while you skip the SPF? Take inventory, simplify the routine, and make sure your tools match the actual physiological task at hand.
And as you conduct that audit and inevitably look closely at those lines in the mirror again, consider this final thought.
Go ahead.
We discussed how expression lines, those deeply etched dynamic turned static furrows, are essentially a physical map of our most frequent emotions. They are the permanent anatomical markers of where we have concentrated intensely, where we have worried, and most importantly, where we have smiled and laughed.
A map of a life.
Exactly. If it is biologically true that even the most advanced topicals cannot fully erase that structural history, perhaps our objective needs to evolve. Perhaps the ultimate goal of skincare is not to aggressively sanitize our faces of the evidence of a life fully lived, but simply to keep the canvas itself as healthy, resilient, and structurally vibrant as possible along the journey.
That's it for today. If you want to check your own routine for ingredient clashes, build a personalized plan, or track your skin's progress, download Skin Bliss at skinbliss.app. See you next time.